Hello everybody, welcome to our new project. Now, if you've watched any of our live videos, you'll know I've been looking for a new project bike and I've been out shopping. I've managed to find the perfect bike for me for this project. I did want to try and film the process of me buying the bike and looking around it and sort of showing you guys what I wanted to do, but unfortunately I couldn't film while I was buying the bike. So I'll show you what I was looking out for in just a minute. But before we do that, I'd just like to let you all know what this project's going to be about. So I've bought this Bandit 1200 because I've always wanted to turbo one. I'm not a turbo expert. I don't know that much about turboing, but it's all about learning. That's what I enjoy doing, and I just want to discover some new things. Now, a few of you might be asking why I didn't turbo my original Bandit. Well, I'm really happy with how it rides and how it looks and how it goes, and I just want to ride it around. The problem with having project bikes is you can work on them a little bit too much and you never actually ride them. So my normal Bandit, my road Bandit, my original Bandit, not sure how I'll keep describing it, but my first Bandit, I just want to ride that now it's finished. So I need this bike to be the new project. So the plans for it: I want to turbo it. That's going to be the main focus of the video series. There's a few other jobs I'll probably do along the way. I quite like the colour, but I'm still not sure it's for me, but I'll probably leave that for a little while. But there may be a few other jobs and bits and bobs I want to do. Now, for me to be able to turbo the bike, one of the things I need to do is learn how to TIG weld. So I can make exhausts and plenums and pipe work and stuff like that. I need a TIG welder. I'm going to be doing some separate videos on my learning experience of TIG welding because it's not something I've ever done before, and hopefully you guys will come along and enjoy learning with me. So that'll be something to come alongside the turbo project. For the turbo project, I need to do lots of learning. What turbo to pick, how the headers should look, how they should flow, any other parts I need, fuel pumps, scavenge pumps, and all these sorts of things. I also need to rebuild the engine. The engine in this bike is perfectly good in its current setup and configuration, but it's not quite suitable for the turbo. While I've got to take the engine apart, I'm going to take the whole thing apart and I'm just going to make sure everything's as it should be, make sure there's nothing worn out or damaged, and then that way I'll have a nice strong engine for when I almost double the horsepower of this bike. So let's stop nattering about the project and let's actually have a look at the bike, and I'll talk you through what I look out for when buying a second-hand bike. So this bit is going to be a little bit shaky hand man, so I'm just going to hold the camera, show you around, and this is the new Bandit. So from a glance, from this far away, it actually looks like a pretty good bike, and it's not bad, to be fair. You know, you got to have a first overall impression of a bike when you look at it, and it doesn't look too bad really. So I tend to just sort of have a bit of a glance have a look underneath, see if there's any oil leaking, which we can't tell at the moment, but if you're going to look at a bike you can. And then, you know, just see if anything jumps out at you. So for instance, I see the old rusty exhaust down here, looks pretty rusty. Is that going to be blowing? Because Bandits are known for the collector box to rot out, you know, anything else. And then I look at the engine, and then I look at the exhaust, and then I look at the engine, and I think, ooh, paint's a little bit flaky, it's a bit rough looking, there's a few bits of paint missing, stuff like that. Now the owner tells me it's recently had its fork seals done, and you can sort of see there's a few sort of marks there, could be a bit of oil residue from when they've been done. It does happen, so I'm not too concerned about that. One thing that did sort of stand out for me straight away is the Tokyo 6 pots. They didn't come on the Mark 1 Bandits as standard. They were fitted to the Mark 2 Bandits. Things like the SRAD 750 GSXR, ZX9s had them as well, and it's also got some braided lines on, which is always good. So the next thing I sort of notice is the brake levers. It's got some aftermarket, probably Chinese brake levers. Now I know a few people don't like those, but I've had a couple of sets and not had any issues. You just got to make sure they're tight and they do the job properly. So yeah, so far this one's looking pretty good. While I'm down at the front looking at the brakes, it's always good to have a look around the rim, see if there's any damage. The tyre looks in pretty good nick, look fairly fresh, and the discs, do the rattle? There's a little bit of movement, but they are floating discs. And then it's always tough, but is there any brake pads? And you know, they are used brake pads, but there's plenty on there, so not too much to worry about. So I look around, there's a few little marks on the mudguard and stuff like that, and there's a little bit of corrosion just there on the forks. So from there I'll probably have a look around, come round to the back end, check the back brakes out, see what's happening here. Again, another pretty new tyre, and they're actually a matching pair, which is always a good thing. See how much brake pad it's got. It's got plenty there. It's a bit hard to see, I know, but and the disc's pretty good. There's a little bit of sort of scoring as such, but yeah, it's a second-hand used brake disc. You look at the torque arm, there's a fair bit of corrosion there, but it's not terrible. And then one thing that I sort of seem to notice is this rear shock. Now I'll try and zoom in, make it a bit brighter. We've actually got a very nice nitron shock in there, and we even have a receipt, which is nice to show when it was fitted. It was bought brand new. So one thing I have noticed, and I actually bought this bike without an MOT, and one reason it would fail an MOT is because they changed the laws recently, and it doesn't have a number plate light. If anyone with a Bandit knows, they sort of stick out a block like that, lights a number plate up, but for some reason this one's been removed, so it would actually fail an MOT, so that's something I will need to do. And the other thing as well is the under tray is being cut down. I'm guilty of this, I know, but when you're looking at a bike, you know, you're hoping it's maybe completely standard. A lot of people don't like cut down mudguards, but it doesn't bother me because I'll probably cut it down anyway. So while I'm down looking at this, you can see a little bit of corrosion on the frame. There's a little bit there, and I don't know if you can see that, but there's a little bit by the foot pegs. Now, it's quite a common place to have the rust there on the footrest bracket of a Bandit. If anyone ever drops the bike, which it does have a little dink in the can, it can push that in, crack the paint, and then corrosion happens. Now, one sort of rule I was always told is never buy bikes from the coast because they tend to be rusty and covered in corrosion. Now, I did buy this from a fairly coastal place, but I'm really impressed with how little corrosion it's actually got. So let's have a move around. Let's come and have a look at this side. This side looks pretty good. Again, one thing that sticks out for me is the engine corrosion. There's plenty down there as well. This cover, I don't know if it's been replaced or just painted, but I don't think they've used the right paint, and it's sort of crazed and cracked and looks a bit horrible, but I'm not too bothered about that because the engine's going to be coming apart. But when you're thinking about a bike, something to think about really. The front sprocket cover, again, that's got, you know, paint missing and stuff like that, but the side stand looks very good all around there. And I don't know if you've noticed around the bike, but it's actually got a lot of nice stainless steel bolts around the place, which means someone's probably cared for it, which is always a good sign when you're coming to buy a bike. Now, rear sprocket. The previous owner, the guy I was buying it from, told me how it's recently had a chain and sprocket kit, and you can see that obviously it's a Renthal one. I'm not a massive fan of the aluminium sprockets. I always seem to chew through them really quickly, but again, it's no big deal. It's got a good chain on it. Now let's have a look at the instruments, shall we? So as you can see, it's done 18,716 miles, which is pretty good. I've checked the MOT history online, and the MOT history does match up, and I've also checked the previous MOTs. In the paperwork I got for the bike, there was quite a big stack, and there's every MOT from new. So I'm pretty sure, unless he did 10,000 miles last year and put the mileage back, which is possible because it doesn't have an MOT on it currently, you know, it could be really, you know, a different mileage. But I think it's a pretty honest bike looking at it. And yeah, I'd believe it's sort of, you know, done 18,000 miles. You know, you look at the frame's in pretty good condition. There's no real corrosion. There's a little bit under the headstock, but minimal. Tiny little piece down there, but again, it's not bad. It's just that flaking paint on the engine, which, if you've ever bought a Bandit, you know they kind of suffer from it, so I'm not really that bothered. So let's have a quick look under the seat. I've got my motorcycle spare parts.eu keyring. Let's have a look and see what's under the seat. Okay, so the first thing that jumps out at me is the blue battery. Obviously most batteries you buy are black. This one is a different colour, so it's blatantly been replaced, which, being that this bike is 19 years old, and I actually bought the bike on its birthday, which I thought was quite interesting. I say it's its birthday, it was the day it was registered, so yeah, quite interesting. So it's obviously got a battery on it. I'm not sure what brand it is because I'm not going to try and pull it out. Now, another thing that catches my eye is just here. Let me zoom in for you. Now, there is a Scotch block there going into the wiring. Now, normally I wouldn't be a massive fan of something like this, but the bike does have a 12-volt socket on it. The guy I've bought it off did say he'd been touring on it. He'd been all around Europe into the Nürburgring and stuff like that, so you know, I can understand an add-on like that. I probably wouldn't go into the fuse box like that, but it's each to their own, so that's something I'll probably repair or pay attention to in the future. The next thing is it's got its original toolkit. Now, depending on who you speak to and what sort of bikes they're into, having the original toolkit is a real bonus for them. You know, the fact that it's still there is pretty good. And should we have a look inside? The Rubber's a bit perished. It's obviously not been out for a while. Let's see what we've got, shall we? So, we've got a couple of Allen keys. I'm pretty sure they're not factory. Aha. So, a few bits and pieces, but there's one crucial piece missing, and that's the tool for the spark plugs. Bandits have got a strange size hole, and generally you need the spark plug spanner that comes with it, but it's not in there. But we've got a screwdriver, 24mm socket, which is for the rear spindle, a random screwdriver, a random spanner. That's there to put on the end of that one, so you can help undoing the rear spindle. And yeah, a couple of bits and bobs. So yeah, it's good to see that. We've also got an adjuster for the rear shock, which is good because it's got that nitron on there. But yeah, looking pretty tidy really. So let's tidy that up, and then we'll start her up and see what the electrics are like. Okay, we've got the key. Let's turn it on, see what happens. So that's good. You've got your neutral light and your oil light, which you need. So let's turn the lights on. Something definitely happened. It's always good. Try and see if these light up, which that one definitely does. I think the bulb might be gone in that side, but it's not a big deal. So let's check the lights. Yep, lights work. We've got the high beam. Excellent. And then let's check the rear light. Perfect. And we'll check the brake lights in a minute. So indicators. They are flashing. Front and rear at the correct speed, but then they would, because they're standard ones. Can't be standard indicators. And then the next one. Yeah, the horn definitely works. So I suppose the next thing to do is, what does the bike run like? Does it start? These are some questions you need to ask. Let's put the camera on a tripod and we'll be back in a second. Before we start the bike up, there's one thing I've completely forgotten to check, and that's the bearings. We've got wheel bearings to check and we've got head race bearings to check. Now, because this bike's been jacked up, you can't actually check it on the centre stand. So we've got Bill to give us a hand lifting the bike, and then we'll be able to check the bearings out. So, Bill, you want to lift the front end? So, Bill's gently moved the front end, and we can see if the front wheel's binding, which it is a little bit, but we can check the bearings, see if there's any play. Always good to check it in a couple of different spots. Nothing there. And then the next thing to do is check for head race play. So I'll move around. I'll put my hands on the bottoms of the fork legs and I'll just try and move them backwards and forwards, and there's no play there. It's also good to move it side to side just to make sure it's smooth and there aren't any notches. Cheers, Bill. You can also check the rear wheel bearing in exactly the same way. So let's start the bike up, see what she sounds like. Now, one thing I would do before starting the bike up, if the owner will let you start it up, is check if the engine's cold. Sometimes bikes rattle a bit when they're cold. Sometimes people will warm them up just to make the rattle go away. So I'd always check the engine's cold before you start it. And the other thing I'd do is check the oil level. Obviously it's not your bike, you're not sure how well they maintain it, and I'd double check the oil level just in case you cause any damage by starting it. So I've checked the oil level, it's all good. It's time to give it a start, see what it sounds like. I'm going to put the choke on as the bike hasn't been started in a good while. Pull the clutch in. She's struggling a little bit, but it's cold. I struggle when it's cold. I also struggle when it's hot. There we go, the revs have increased a little bit, so we'll let the choke off. coughing and spluttering a little bit, which isn't great, but don't know if you can hear that through the microphone, but it's definitely on 3 cylinders. Yeah, it's definitely not running on all 4 cylinders, but while the bike's running, we can check things like the exhaust. Is the exhaust blowing? Now, if you put your hand over the end can gently, it cuts it out, but I could hear a blow from there. So let's try that again. So let's put our hand over the end of the exhaust, and it's definitely still running. You can feel and hear a blow coming from the collector, which means it's probably going to need replacing. Now, one thing you can do to see which cylinder's working is actually touch the exhaust pipes. Now, I wouldn't recommend this because you're probably going to burn yourself on them. So what I occasionally use is a temperature gauge just to see what they are. But unfortunately, I don't have that with me, so I'm going to have to lick my finger, see if it's hot. That one does have a tiny bit of temperature to it, but it is pretty cold. That one is properly hot. That one's hot. And so's that one. So, out of all of those, I'd say cylinders 1, 2 and 3 are running, but 4 definitely isn't. So, what do I think of the bike in general? Well, it's not in bad nick. You've got to remember it is a 19-year-old bike that has been used. The guys used it for touring. It's only had 4 owners, and those 4 owners really have looked after it, I think. It certainly is a credit to them. Not, for me, isn't a massive issue. The owners told me he has cleaned the carbs, but has struggled to balance them and set them up, so I'm not too worried about that. You know, there could be an engine problem why it's only running on 4 cylinders, but even running on 3 cylinders, it sounded like a nice, good, quiet engine. Road testing it could be an issue. If it's only running on 3 cylinders, it's not something you really want to ride on the road, so you can't test out the gearbox and the clutch. But I was willing to take a chance for this project bike. If you're buying a second-hand bike, is it worth taking a chance? That is entirely up to you. Let me know what you think in the comments. So I'm happy with it as a project bike. If you was riding it home on 3 cylinders, probably isn't the best bet, but luckily I had the van and I knew the bike was going to be a project. Another thing is the blowing exhaust. Now, that is something you'd have to consider for replacement or repair if you was going to use the bike, but as it's a project and as I'm doing a turbo project, I don't actually need the exhaust system, so I wasn't worried about that part not being serviceable. So I hope you found the video interesting. I hope you're looking forward to the new project, and hopefully that's given you some insight into what I look for when I'm buying a second-hand bike. I'd just like to say thanks to all the subscribers and all the guys that comment each week, and even the guys on Facebook that say hello occasionally. We really appreciate your comments, and we really do appreciate you guys watching. I think it's amazing how far the videos have come in a year. So guys, thank you ever so much for that. The turbo project isn't going to be a fast project. It's going to take a bit of time because I need to do some learning and stuff like that, but hopefully you can learn on the way with me. So if you want to see all of our videos, we've got some new exciting content and stuff coming out soon. Don't forget to subscribe and then hit the bell icon, and you get a notification every time we make an upload, which is normally Sunday evenings at 9 PM. So until next time, we'll see you later.